Hi, and welcome to another episode of Legend Lore, the podcast series where two dungeon masters flip through one Dungeons and Dragons book at a time, giving their insights on the pros and cons of the publication in question. Normally, I'd be sitting here in the studio with a Wizards of the Coast publication in my hands, ready to tear it apart with a co-host and dig into the guts of it, but this episode is going to be a little bit different because I'm joined via Zoom by a third-party content creator, Trent, who's here on behalf of Gelatinous Cubicle to talk about their newest project called Tales from the Firelit Gathering. It launches today on Kickstarter and is a collection of very impressive homebrew content, and I have gone back and forth through this PDF about 6 or 7 times myself. But before we dig into it, hi Trent, how are you?
Hey there, Adam. I'm doing great.
Tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with tabletop role-playing games before we jump into this.
Yeah, for sure. So I and the rest of the team members have been playing TTRPGs now collectively for decades. I'm actually probably the quote-unquote least experienced as far as dungeon mastering goes. I've been DMing now for about 5 years. So I got on the 5th edition train just a little late. But my other two team members have been playing D&D 5th edition and in some cases games before that. So 3.5, Pathfinder, and other role-playing systems since they were in, middle and high school. So we've been at it now for quite some time. I myself have been, a bit of a tabletop gamer for a very long time. My parents always had family game night going on, so I have a lot of exposure to board games. I was part of the Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering trading card game craze.
Yep.
I've been playing, they've hooked me, and I've been playing those for pretty much since I could read. And I've also been an avid just video gamer for my whole life. So a lot of exposure to games.
Yeah, you've seen a whole lot of different kinds of mechanics and design choices and different storytelling techniques then over the years.
For sure.
I gotta ask, what's your favorite class to play?
My favorite class? That's a tough one. I tend to lean towards casters. And if I had to pick now, I would probably say sorcerer. As much as I like wizard, and I'm playing wizard in a campaign right now, sorcerer is really kind of edge it out for me because I like having a lot of choices, right? So I get to choose my spells, express my character through my spell choices. And sorcerers allow me to really kind of push that to the next level with meta magic.
Yeah.
Meta magic is probably one of my favorite mechanics in 5th edition. And I'm at the point now where I've experimented with just about all of the meta magic that's available. And it's always good fun to just use your spells in really unexpected ways.
What's your favorite playable race?
Playable race? Well, so my first character was a Goliath, and I've been an addict ever since. There's something that's really fulfilling about playing just someone who's larger than everyone else. And Stone's endurance is just never not useful. So
yeah,
if I had to only choose one race, that would be it. Though I'll admit that I'm often boring and go with variant humans.
And my last one is, what's your favorite monster?
Favorite monster? Am I allowed to say one of our creations?
No. Out of the published material that the listeners know.
Oh, okay. Sure. Oh, man. Probably, it would be wrong for me to not say an ooze. I'll give an honorable mention to rust monsters. There's something really, really spectacular about the first time you throw rust monsters at new players, and they start to realize that there's more at their hit points, right?
Yeah.
So on that note, being gelatinous cubicles, I gotta say black puddings with the similar sort of destruction mechanic. But I think we've had, in my many years of playing now, I think we've had 2 player deaths to black puddings so far.
Oh, that's very specific. Yeah.
We've fought dozens of them, but they always raise the stakes in really interesting ways.
So Gelatinous Cubicle. You're in Florida right now. Is everybody in Gelatinous Cubicle in Florida, or are you like across the states or international?
Yes, so we're all based in Florida. We all met at a college in Florida, actually. We were roommates for some time. That's how I got into 5th edition, actually, was playing with some of my team members. And we, would have these long talks that would go well into the early hours of the morning about just our campaigns and ideas. And over years and years, that translated into us creating a homebrew. And eventually, we had all moved away, and we were all just sort of, living our post-college life, sort of moving from job to job. And we decided, after all having saved up some money, that we were going to sort of come together and take a chance and see what we could do as far as just like game design goes. So we have been now creating content for 5th edition for about 3 years. And just about a year ago, we all moved in together, and we have sort of a collective office that we operate out of. And we've just sort of been on the grind, seeing what we can make happen. So that's the story, I suppose.
Yeah, and you've done a lot. Like you say 3 years, but I had the pleasure of browsing your website. I'm going to throw the link to it in the show notes below for anybody that wants to go check it out. But you guys have a Patreon that's up and running, and there are a number of different backgrounds and races, classes and subclasses. There are feats and magic items and spells and monsters. Who is the main creative brain behind the actual crunchy D&D stuff, or is it kind of spread out among everybody?
So it really depends on the project. Part of why I like working on the team that I do is because we all, obviously we have this common interest of 5th edition, but we all kind of bring our own experiences to the table. And so we will just sort of brainstorm and come up with different ideas. Sometimes our patrons will send us ideas. Sometimes we'll just have gotten really into some video game or some show that inspired us. And basically, whoever feels particularly passionate about a project will take it on. And from there, we pass it around amongst ourselves, give each other criticism and feedback to kind of iron out the details. And we all kind of have our own special place in the process. The team member James is particularly good when it comes to mechanics wording and things like that, making things, really proper in terms of how they function, worded sort of like an official, Wizards of the Coast publication. And meanwhile, Nona, another team member, handles like the flavor text, and I tend to handle sort of the layout design. Beyond that, though, as far as just designing pieces of content, it's really whoever feels particularly passionate about it will take sort of a lead position creatively on that project.
It does sound like it's a huge collaboration then among the group of you. There's not one person spearheading it.
For sure. I mean, I definitely sort of slip into the director role oftentimes, but that's very much it's just to sort of keep things moving, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes, that makes sense. I understand that position.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So it sounds like we might be two kindred spirits in that regard.
So what part, which one is your favorite thing to design? Like backgrounds, classes, monsters, spells? What's your bread and butter?
Probably my two favorite things are monsters and subclasses. The reason for those being that I find those are some of the most impactful ways to either directly affect a session or directly affect a campaign or directly affect a character. Kind of my big thing when I create is I try to ask myself, what fantasy am I trying to help other people realize through the game, right? So I mentioned before that we take inspiration oftentimes from TV shows or books or whatever it be. And part of that is because, there are D&D is a very special game in that you can really realize something in a particular way. It's kind of an awkward way of answering this question. So I'm going to try and come up with a better way of coming around it here. So essentially we kind of approach creating content for D&D like a medium, sort of like an artistic medium, right? There's a certain way you should write books that will be much more effective in the medium of books, and the same is true of movies and so on and so forth. We kind of approach D&D game design from that same perspective. So what makes game design special is you are using game mechanics to allow a player to realize some kind of fantasy, right? So I've lost sight of our original question here.
It was which one which kind of category are you the most excited about designing for? You said subclasses and monsters.
Yeah. So as far as that goes, subclasses obviously have a really huge impact on how your character plays.
Yeah.
Choosing a certain subclass is very important and will affect, everything about your character, from role play to combat to anything else within the game. So to me, it just feels the most impactful. And then the same is kind of true from the other side of the table with the GM and monsters. Personally, I always try to build interesting sessions around monsters. So being able to provide interesting monster mechanics and some sort of, lore hooks that will help a DM build a story is sort of what I'm most passionate about, because it's I guess the most direct way to really provide something substantial to a game.
Yeah, I'm going to say that 9 times out of 10, when you run into a monster, it's a direct conflict of some sort. And the other, 10% of the time, it's an indirect conflict.
Right.
And our
Yeah.
jobs... Sorry, go ahead.
Even if it is indirect, a good encounter with a monster is going to affect everything happening around it, right? So obviously you can have your random encounters and whatnot, but those really memorable encounters, I find, even if it is, a satyr who's not looking to hurt anyone, maybe he's causing a lot of chaos in a town somewhere. And those kind of shenanigans, even if they're not direct conflicts or, physical or violence necessarily, that tying monsters into the world and what's happening within it is sort of paramount.
Yeah, and that's one of the big complaints that we've had recently with Wizards of the Coast productions, is that we're not getting the lore that we used to get in previous editions, and even earlier in 5th edition, as things become more setting agnostic. We're not getting that level of flavor and lore, which is going to help the dungeon master or the players get more of a touchstone, a connection to the world, and a purpose behind the conflict, motivation behind it. So I'm excited to see. Like I say, I browsed through your website pretty extensively. There's a lot of lore in there. There's thought behind literally every decision, and that's not true of most of the Kickstarter stuff. I've had the privilege of flipping through your 28-page preview document as well here, and even your framing device is steeped in lore. Most people could just say, here's a collection of stuff, or hey, you know what, we're really inspired by the plane of fire, here's a bunch of fire stuff in a PDF. But what you guys have done is you've come up with this framing device that is a character in and of themselves, right? That is giving a series of tales, I guess. Hell, is right in the name. It's Tales from the Firelit Gathering, right? But there's this one character at the center of it all, who is, I guess, extolling this information out to, in theory, other people sitting around this Firelit Gathering, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I'd love to actually talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you tell me about this character and why you went with this decision for your publication?
Sure. Well, you say, I appreciate it very much that it feels like there's a bunch of thought put into every decision. I can say sometimes maybe a little too much thought, but that's probably better than none at all.
Yeah.
As far as Tales from the Firelit Gathering goes, this book was originally conceived, as you say, we've been at this for quite some time. We have quite the collection that we've built. This was originally intended as sort of a remaster of all of our favorite content that we've created over the years, and all of the content that we felt was the most impactful. And that idea, as it took shape, began to evolve. Something that always has made us feel good as we're creating is when we get a comment along the lines of, this is great because I've wanted to play a character like this for some time, and this is finally what's going to allow me to do so, right? Yeah. Homebrewing, I can certainly say that when I began, when we all began, we weren't very good at it. It's extremely challenging to get something that feels good. As much shit as we give Wizards of the Coast, I do think that as far as mechanical design goes, they're pretty top cut. So yes, this was sort of our remaster book. As the idea evolved, we sort of began to take it in the direction of we. It's tough to find a way to tie things in together. As you say, a lot of people sort of just present a collection of things, which there's certainly nothing wrong with. But all in all, that tends to feel a little empty to me. And so we really looked at what we had, which was this disparate collection of different material. And the through line that we found was A, sort of our passion for it and, what we had accomplished sort of as friends creating this material. And B, that all in all, the reason that we made what we were making was the impact that it had on tables, that, people could come to our website and find all sorts of interesting ideas that they may not have thought of. And so we're saying, okay, we have all of these different ideas. Well, what if we played into that, right? Rather than just a collection, what if we found some way to frame this as a collection of tales from all around the world? So immediately, we've always been concerned with sort of playing against type and adding new ways of playing into 5th edition.
Yep.
So Kazan was sort of conceptualized. He's this front character who is, hosting these firelit gatherings and gathering these adventurers to hear about these tales that he's collected from all over the world. He was sort of conceptualized as a challenge in of himself to sort of some long existing stereotypes within really just tabletop role playing in general. So Kazan is an orc. Yeah. He's a very skinny orc. He's a very flashy orc, sort of flamboyant even, and a very, very wise orc. And so Kazan was conceptualized as a challenge to what an orc could be, right? And
I also feel just from what I know of him is that he fills the niche that that Volo wants to fill. And if Volo were to be beside Kazan, Volo would feel a little bit threatened.
Perhaps, and not just because of the teeth, right?
Yeah, no, but I feel like Kazan is probably a better version of Volo, who is unreliable at best, whereas Kazan is presenting actual lore and whatnot beyond the. I don't know. I've heard this kind of. So it was really cool. I get the impression he's like an eloquence bard almost.
Something like that. We haven't made a character sheet for him or anything, but we definitely have some fun Easter eggs that we're planning on kind of seeding throughout the book as far as Kazan is concerned. But that the consistency was definitely something we wanted to emphasize. Kazan, we wanted him to almost feel like he knew a little too much and was playing coy with that information sometimes, right? Because we did want to establish him as a very reliable narrator, even if he's sort of strange and goofy, and we're not really sure where he's from or how he's been around for so long or how he's survived this long. But the one thing we know is that we can go to Kazan's Firelit Gathering and we can hear a story and we will be entertained and we will be safe and we will be among friends. And so that kind of idea of togetherness was also something we were trying to hone in on. Hence, not just Kazan, but his recitals dubbed the Firelit Gathering.
Sorry, I wanted to ask because there's a great, cover piece of him extolling his stories to a group of people sitting around a fire. Are those characters sitting around the fire, are those your player characters from before, or are they just random D&D?
So we worked with an artist by the name of Antti Hakosaari, and Kazan was our primary concern with this cover. So what we wanted to show with these characters, these are not our characters. These are not our characters. What we wanted to do is sort of show, there's something I find with Dungeons and Dragons parties where they tend to be composed of, to put it lightly, sort of freaks in a way, right?
Everyone is special in their own unique way, right? Like
exactly.
No one is a farmer and looks like a farmer. They may have come from a farm, but they're wild.
Right. And so whenever an adventuring party walks in the tavern, everyone knows it's the adventuring party.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do with these characters was two things. We wanted to show Kazan and sort of frame him as the primary piece here. Even the fire is, lighting him up in the center of the page. And then as far as the characters go, we wanted to show that they were sort of a hodgepodge group of individuals. So that you'll find they're all dressed very differently. They're all, completely different races. We've even got different ages. And sort of the one connecting factor is that they're all coming together to hear this story. So I suppose the idea was we wanted to make it feel like it could be anyone's adventuring party, right?
Yeah.
We wanted to sort of play to the idea of an adventuring party as almost like a frame around Kazan himself.
You can see that in the artwork too. The fact that it's like the main adventuring archetypes are there, right?
Yes, yeah, we wanted everything. We've got our mage on the left, our warrior, got sort of an elvish ranger running in from the side, and finally, of course, we've got our bard with the dragonborn.
Yeah. So you said a couple times this is a bit of a remaster. This book is going to be a remaster. Are you planning on adding new stuff as well, or is it just going to be retooling the stuff from the website or your Patreon?
Yes, there is going to be plenty of new material as well. What we did to sort of start planning the project was we sort of just made a spreadsheet, essentially, of everything it is that we've made. We organized it into differing categories, and we sort of picked our favorites from each. And sometimes that left us with holes. And so we've got lots of holes that we're looking to fill with new content. We're looking to sort of get our audience's input on that and the backers' input in some cases to sort of help us decide what we're going to include in the book. Sort of as we've done before, I mentioned we do sort of votes with our audience to help, give us ideas. But the book is going to contain both remasters as well as plenty of new material as well. Really, the through line is that we are just trying to sort of fill gaps in D&D 5th edition, where it seems like there are certain character archetypes that should exist that don't. And we're just trying to sort of, I guess, serve on those underserved ideas. But I'm sure we'll get into that as we sort of go through our preview here.
Do you have roughly an idea of how long the finished product is going to be, like by page count, maybe?
Sure. So roughly, we're still in the process of creating everything. But our sweet spot is over 200 pages. Some of what's going to end up in the book and the length is going to depend on the level of funding and the stretch goals we hit. Obviously, the more books we sell, the more we can include, because the bigger your book, the more it costs to print. And so if we sell enough, then we can sort of make up for some of those lost margins and sort of expand the content of the book a little. But I'd say at the very least, expect the book to be just over 200 pages. And we're probably not looking to go any higher than 250. But we'll just have to see what happens.
Sure. I guess my last question before we start to dig into this PDF, this preview that you sent is, are you looking at filling in? You say there's a lot of filling in the gaps in D&D, a lot of the archetypes that aren't there and whatnot. And I really do get that impression when I'm looking at this, like, hey, I'm glad this has been added. There are a few bits and pieces that are reminiscent of older editions as well, that I'm like, oh, cool, okay, that's come back now. I myself have my own homebrew rules for things like a buckler. You've included that in your item list. I've got buckler rules in my homebrew, right? And that's a throwback to 3.5. So as cool as that is, are you guys looking at filling in gaps in lore? Is it supposed to be like campaign setting agnostic or Forgotten Realms? Or do you just kind of leave it for, pick and choose what you want as a player when you open the book?
Sure. So it's meant to be setting agnostic primarily. We are definitely going to be including. We're trying to go deep on the lore without giving you specific say, locations, right?
So like the mention of
yeah.
of the outskirts of a village as opposed to the outskirts of this village.
Exactly, right? So we want this to be useful first and foremost. And so we are doing our best to sort of strike the balance between giving you enough information about these concepts to inspire you, while also not getting so specific with it that you can't drop it into your own, homebrew setting, or even if you want to, the Forgotten Realms or anything else. Really, we're trying to be modular with what we're doing here.
There is one, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but there's one subclass that's coming up here, the Ranger subclass that you have, which fits so perfectly in the Forgotten Realms, but also in Eberron and Spelljammer. And it was the thing that made me raise my eyebrows more than anything else and say, this could fit anywhere. It's weird that we don't have this already. So that was, let's jump into the PDF if you don't mind. So I'm gonna do this a little bit like we normally do on a Legend Lore. So I'll give some brief descriptions here so the audience knows what we're looking at. But we've got this beautiful splash page, this cover of the Tales from the Firelit Gathering. I keep wanting to say Tales from the Yawning Portal just because it's worked its way, like my mouth shape wants to say that, but
oh, for sure. No, I've got it sitting on my shelf right here, and it's staring at me as I work on this project every day.
Well, it's interesting because Tales from the Yawning Portal is very much 7 adventures. I think it's seven right. Adventures where Durnan is telling you a bunch of different tales in a bar about things that people have, like adventures they've gone on, and it's the framing device is one person telling stories, except that book is all about the adventures that people went on, whereas this book is all about the things you can run into, right? And it's got a very similar, a very familiar feel, and yet it's totally different format as well. So I do like the parallels there. That felt really good to me when I opened this up and I started to flip through it. The contents and credits page here, I mean, this is just the preview PDF, right? So there's 28 pages here, and then page 28 is the OGL, right? So there's 27 pages of content. You have a number of illustrators. Do you guys, did you hunt out and pay artists? Are these friends of yours? Are they collaborators on other projects that have all come together on this?
These are people we've hunted down one way or another. Some of them are artists that we've just had pre-existing connections with, and some of them we did a lot of sort of scouting in terms of potential artists. One of our biggest concerns is with this book, obviously we're trying to represent such a breadth of ideas. One of our biggest concerns is making sure that things feel sufficiently unique from one another.
Yep.
And so, it was very important to us from the outset to not only work with a large number of artists, but a large number of different kinds of artists, and artists from different places and backgrounds. So
I can tell just based on the names here that we've got people from all over the world, right?
Yes, yeah, and that was an absolute pleasure to do, and I think it's really been a great experience just sort of watching, even for just the preview, things shake out, because all of these people have sort of brought their own flavor to things, and it keeps I find, at least as you scroll through the pages, it keeps things feeling fresh. So
now I'm also going through the contents and credits here, and it looks like there's 4 of you that have really focused on the game design. There's 4 brain trusts behind this entire thing.
Yes.
When you talk about game design itself, the 4 of you, are you all D&D players together? You all sit at the same table?
Yes. We actually even do, we have our own sort of format of campaign. Obviously, we've done campaigns where we have a single DM. We've done plenty of those. I mean, we've played in dozens and dozens of campaigns with each other over the years now. But we have a format where we actually pass the role of DM around the table in sort of one continuous story. And I think it's funny because it's almost analogous to, how our game design philosophy functions, in that we sort of, one of us begins something and then it gets passed off and so on and so forth. And through that collaboration, we really come to something great. I will say that one of our members is sort of focusing on other things. So Julienne has been with us since day one. And a lot of the content in here is remastered versions of their creations. But they are sort of just doing what they can from the sidelines as far as this project goes, just to help us out. Right now, the core team is definitely the three of Nona, myself, and James.
All right. And then it looks like you've collaborated a little bit with Spectre Creations and Port and Press and Shiny Press as well.
Yeah.
So there have been other people involved in this as well.
Yeah, some folks. So actually, they sort of those special thanks are people that when we sort of entered the D&D homebrew creation space, we found that people were super supportive and welcoming, and those are just some of our friends from day one, really, who have been giving us advice and supporting us, and so
that's cool.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the next page, we've got using this preview, which is obviously probably not going to be in the finished product, but there'll probably be a similar page, how to use this book. That's pretty standard for a lot of homebrew stuff. As well as the idea, we've got this little message here from Kazan himself. This, I have to say, the moment I hit this page, this felt like 5th edition. Just the way that you have it formatted, the different the fonts are just slightly different, the coloration is slightly different, but the layout, the sidebars, the way that the tables are laid out and the spacing of it all feels very official in ways that other big publications don't feel. Like I've gone through Matt Colville's books. I love everything that Matt Colville has done. I jumped on buying both of those books, and they feel like a different game when you open them up. That stuff can be used in 5th edition, but it doesn't feel like 5th ed. The Tal'Dorei campaign setting the Critical Role released, very cool. Didn't quite feel, based on the layout, like this was a book that belonged in the lineup of 5th edition. And a lot of the PDFs, I recently went through all of the online releases from the PDFs to the D&D Beyond stuff, the official Wizards of the Coast online stuff, and I released 4 episodes of breaking all of those down. Some of them feel good, some of them feel like this is a third-party thing that they kind of put a stamp on, and it doesn't feel like D&D. This very much does. Whoever designed the layout and the graphic design of this hit the nail on the head. This feels fucking bang on. So
well, I really appreciate that. That would be yours truly. That has been, I would like to speak to that just a little bit.
Sure.
Sort of our philosophy as a company has always been sort of from day one that we want to create things, not that WotC is unchallengeable in what they do, but they do, I find, a great job of fleshing out sort of layout design, keeping things simple and digestible while also, fairly fleshed out. And so our goal was to use that as inspiration and create something that would feel at home on your shelf with your other 5th edition supplements, while also having just a bit of distinct flavor from us, right? And like you say, Matt Colville produces amazing things, and I certainly think it's great that creators can really sort of break away and develop their own highly unique voice. But our concern has always been sort of a synthesis between 5th edition, which is what we exclusively develop for, and sort of our own spin on 5th edition, I suppose.
Yeah, and I have followed a number of other Kickstarters and looked at other people's projects. I don't know if any of the listeners know this, but about every 3 or 4 months, someone will send me a homebrew project. I'll flip through it and give notes back. And a lot of the times it reads like a Word document, or the formatting is just a little bit off and something a little bit funky that doesn't feel good to read. This does feel good. Like this is easily accessible. I know where to look for the information and the necessary pieces at a glance, even if I'm not familiar with every word in the book, because I've read other 5th edition material. So this is really lined up well, and that and just the high quality of the art, it feels like a D&D book, right? And I don't say that lightly. I have been very critical even of Wizards of the Coast art in the past. It seems to be the only thing they're doing well these days in their publications. But this art that you guys are producing is as good as, if not better, the 5th edition art that we've seen so far. The very first thing that we
appreciate that, yeah. And that's, I mean, to some degree, that's just the the team we've managed to bring together, right? Just, I really think the team of artists is, or rather, really just the depth of the number of artists we're working with has been a boon to that.
Well, yeah, but it's every little detail too. Like when you flip to the first page of chapter 1, you have this nice piece of art here. And again, I don't know how this is going to lay out in the final product, but in the preview, there is a single what looks like a martial character with lightning swirling around her in the middle of some sort of combat maneuver. But the thing about the border between the page and the art, where it is that kind of like clouded shift from the artwork onto the page itself, that's even out of the majority of the Wizards books. And these are the details that you don't see in other third-party productions or Kickstarters or whatnot. This level of congruity almost between what you guys are producing and what Wizards has produced. I gotta say, I'm legitimately excited. The level of detail on this is something that I harp on a lot when the detail and the design and the lore falls apart in Wizards of the Coast. And I have not been, thus far, not been able to poke any holes in this. I've gone through this PDF a few times now and very, very happy with what I see. Let's go into the content, though. The very first thing that you guys gave us is a single, because it's a preview, but it's a single a new playable race called Wakeful. And the Wakeful is essentially a skeleton playable race, but dead, but not dead. There's like lying dormant. There's a whole sidebar about the dormancy. The art here is really cool. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we're going to have little bits and pieces of the art up in the video. But it's really fun and really flavorful in ways that I was not expecting it to be, right? You guys also have a great grasp on language as well. I did laugh out loud when I saw the osteopathic nature. There are little bits and pieces that I like, but this is not undead. This is a construct, right? Even though it's a skeleton. And so it's seeing it kind of from different ways of looking at how this character might interact. My favorite thing about it is that you can actually rip the rib bones out and use them as daggers, which is a lot of fun. And it's that level of creativity here that we're not seeing in the playable races from Wizards of the Coast now. Now it's just, and this one's an owl and this one's a rabbit, right?
Oh yeah, the beast folk, the never-ending beast folk.
It's just an onslaught of anthropomorphic nonsense at this point, because that seems to be what they think we want. But I do appreciate this level of design for the playable race. Do you have more that you're going to add as well to the final copy?
Yes. We're looking at around 4 to 6 player races right now, including the Wakeful, which is among our favorites. And all of them are priority. I will say some of them are beast folk adjacent. We are certainly looking at octopi and things like that, but our priority with everything is to make it feel distinct. Some of the problems I have with beast folk is not necessarily the number of them, but the number of them that exist without much thought put into why they exist. You know, if I'm going to play a lion or a rabbit or whatever it is that I'm interested in playing, I think it's important that, again, homebrew is meant to deliver on fantasy. So you have to provide the player with ways of engaging with that concept through mechanics. And some official races are more successful than others, to be sure. But that for our player races, the priority is to make them feel distinct. As far as the Wakeful are concerned, it's kind of our take on the undead playable race, where obviously they're creature type construct and not undead. Part of the reason we did that was because undead are so contentious in what they can be in settings, right? Sometimes undead are entirely mindless, pure forces of evil, and it just doesn't make sense necessarily to have a player character walking around as an undead. Meanwhile, sometimes undead are sort of just another creature in the world like any other.
Yeah.
But with the Wakeful, we wanted to sort of, deliver on the fantasy of being an undead. And we can get into some of that with their abilities and things like that. But we also wanted to make sure that we didn't want players to simply be barred from playing the Wakeful just because they had baggage in regards to sort of the undead tag, right?
Yeah, fair enough. One of the things I noticed here before we move on, there's a lot to cover here. We're on page 5, and we're like halfway through the episode. But one of the things I noticed is that you have decided not to include a ability score modifier. Are you putting that in backgrounds the way that 5th edition is going, or are you just steering clear of that? Or
so this was even a contentious issue among the team, as much as it is among the 5th edition player base, it seems. Ultimately, what we decided was that when we began, obviously ability score improvements were sort of the standard. Then we started to see Wizards of the Coast sort of phase them out. There was a time where we provided them as options. And really what we found was that it sort of it gave a suggestion, but I'm just not sure how helpful of a suggestion it was. And we, in the interest of allowing you to build unique characters, this book is meant to help you build characters that are uniquely yours. We wanted to really just give people the freedom to interpret everything else as far as the race's mechanics for themselves, and simply just choose the ability score that either felt appropriate to the race or felt appropriate to whatever class it is they decide to play alongside it. We want a Wakeful to be able to be a barbarian as much as a Wakeful can be a rogue or a bard or anything else. So
yeah. Okay. Speaking of barbarian, the very first subclass we get is Path of the Primal Sentry. One of the things that I love about this is, much like we're seeing in Tasha's now and a lot of the other books, is we're getting these little quotes at the beginning of each section. I'm assuming this is Kazan talking as well in his voice. Because we have, it takes a beautiful kind of madness to be empathetically aligned with a thunderstorm, which is just a great quote. But every single one of these sections, I mean, the Wakeful had one as well. They all have these quotes, and you're starting to get the flavor of who this character is as well. And it's a lot of fun. I don't want to spend too much time going through the mechanics of them. I've gone through them, and they all seem very balanced. They also are giving the appropriate kind of feature and trait, the class feature at the appropriate level, so that it feels like it's balanced against other ones in their own class as well. So this scales at about the same rate as other barbarians do, instead of being front-loaded or back-loaded or anything as well. But I thought it was really interesting that you guys decided. Barbarians are known for their inability to cast spells when they rage, and then you made a magic barbarian.
That's right. Yes. So I think, honestly, that in a nutshell is sort of the impetus behind this book in a lot of ways, sort of challenging sort of some preconceived notions about what certain characters can or can't be. I will say the Primal Sentry certainly approaches casting in a very unique way, so that it doesn't feel out of place. Because one thing we don't want to do is, while we're challenging these sort of traditions, we don't want those challenges to feel cheap. We don't just want to allow a barbarian to simply cast because we say it can now. So we were really looking for ways to make spell casting feel like it played alongside the barbarian class. So the Primal Sentry allows you to, when you enter a rage, you simultaneously, depending on what the spell is, can cast a concentration spell during that rage. And so in that way, what's happening is you are using your rage as a barbarian. You're using that state to channel forces of nature. And so we're giving you access to concentration spells that are both druidic, we're giving you access to concentration spells that are druidic, so from the Druid and Ranger spell list. And while you are concentrating on those spells, you are raging. And so we found sort of the congruency between those two mechanics and tied them together so that this felt, like a really cool addition and an appropriate addition too.
Yeah. I really like this. The flavor of it is really fun, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And again, the words you're using, the language, the different names of the class features, reckless casting, savage spells, force of nature. These things sound like a barbarian, and it feels good, right? Someone who knows 5th edition, who has DM for a number of barbarians at my tables, this feels natural. It feels better than the wild magic barbarian.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. That was definitely one of our starting points, but I think part of my problem that I've had with wild magic barbarians is I suppose the lack of choice. I mean, I like chaos. I really love wild magic sorcerer, actually, but there's a lack of choice associated with it, and there's a limited nature to it in terms of the wild magic barbarian only has 8 options available on the wild magic effects table. Yeah. And so it's kind of disappointing to A, not have control over that, and B, so often get overlapping options. At least with the wild magic sorcerer, you may not have control over what's happening, but it's going to feel really unique every time.
Mm-hmm. Let's move on to the next one, which is a monk subclass. This is the Way of the Brawler. I thought that we have needed something like this. And we have Tavern Brawler as I think it's a feat now.
Yes, it's a feat.
But it doesn't feel like it's enough. I've always thought that it would be a fighter, but I like it as a monk. It feels like this is bare knuckle boxing out in the parking lot, right?
Yes, absolutely. Street fighting was a huge point of inspiration for this. This was actually the first piece of homebrew that I ever created. And so that was maybe 5 years ago I began working on this. And it's been through, maybe 4 or 5 iterations since. I really love martial arts. It's something I've been involved in for a long time. And thus, if I have to play a martial character, oftentimes it's going to be a monk. I like monks quite a bit. Something that I find, a bit tedious about monks, or something that can get tedious at least, is just how much baggage there is in terms of flavor. I mean, it's great to be able to play sort of a martial arts master and be associated with a temple or a monastery, but that's not appropriate for every monk. That's not appropriate for every character. And so Way of the Brawler was sort of a way to take those ideas regarding street fighting and apply it to a monk. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, monks represent sort of a mastery of hand-to-hand combat. And even if they're not in a monastery or training with a master of some kind, street brawlers, at least accomplished ones, have certainly honed a skill. And so it felt appropriate to kind of tie the two ideas together and allow sort of a more rough and tumble fighter to sort of gain access to ki.
Yeah. And honestly, the idea, I think you're dead on. The idea of the martial artist who sits on a mountaintop is one flavor. Yes. But apparently, as far as Wizards goes, it's every flavor. So it's nice to get something different. Yep. After that, here we go. Here's the Ranger subclass that I was talking about that feels like it could fit in Eberron or in Spelljammer or the Forgotten Realms. This is the Ooze Rancher. It took me a while to wrap my brain around this as a Ranger, but it's so much fun. I like the fact that it has an increased spell list. I like the fact that everything about it is about ooze and slime and the flavor as a ranger. And you actually have stats for the ooze companion here as well, which is a load of fun, and it gets the ability to do a bunch of stuff. It has its own reaction. It has the ability to bounce around. And it was spider climb for an ooze is always something that we should be seeing, and of course it's included here. The thing, though, that stood out to me that kind of set me off in another direction was the artwork. This character is in a wheelchair, clearly in a battle wheelchair, because there are spikes coming off of the wheels. Like, this is a paraplegic actual adventurer, not someone sitting in a tavern, right?
Yep,
and inclusion seems to be a serious consideration across the board in Tales of the Firelit Gathering. So, and it's not preachy, and it's not pulling focus from the energetic and inspirational world of fantastical Dungeons and Dragons. It feels natural. It's a really smooth and nice balance that has a lot of content creators, that a lot of content creators don't necessarily think of immediately when they're writing their own content, right? They think about, here's what I can do, and I want to be able to do more, not what can other people do, right? So I wanted to just take a second out for just a moment and ask you, why is it so important to you and the rest of Gelatinous Cubicle to have this level of inclusion in your work? What has inspired you guys to kind of look beyond just the average content creation?
Sure. So that's kind of a deep question.
That's how I roll.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm excited to talk about this. So we, over the years, have sort of we've been sort of a core group in terms of our play group, but over the years we have played with so many different kinds of people. We ourselves are a fairly queer group of people. It's part of what brought us together. And as far as people we've played with people from different backgrounds, different beliefs. We've played even with disabled individuals, people without limbs. And that was always something that I felt 5th edition never quite delivered on. Again, this book is kind of to serve underserved concepts. And so as far as Wizards of the Coast is concerned, 5th edition is a fairly inclusive game, or at least the people I've played with are very friendly, very warm, very welcoming. But I feel nonetheless that the artwork that Wizards of the Coast provides is a little bit behind in terms of what they could be doing in terms of representing different kinds of adventurers. I really appreciate that you mentioned, it's not preachy, because that's not our goal in any of this. And I think that kind of thing can turn people off fairly so. And that's not our goal. Our goal is not to draw lines or say you must play this kind of character. It's the exact opposite. It's to break down barriers. It's to bring people together and really help you think about the possibilities as far as the kinds of characters that you can play. And so that has been sort of one of our central guiding principles, just in terms of what we integrate into this book. And of course, that's not to say you're not going to have, your big muscular barbarians. The page before, we had a dwarf who is, probably his biceps are twice the size of his head. But it is to say that that's not the only thing you're going to see in this book, right? We're really trying to give food for thought, give food for your imagination in terms of what's possible.
I have to say, in all fairness, Wizards of the Coast has started moving in that direction, and for every step forward they seem to take 10 fucking steps back. Like they do, for example, Mystic Odysseys of Theros gave us clearly LGBT characters in the artwork, but it's never mentioned anywhere in the actual lore. We've got all sorts of different playable races and creatures and whatnot that change gender, but it's never really mentioned. The fact that the incubus and the succubus are the same creature now when they were different before, the ability to swap gender, it's not a big deal. Kobolds can do it, and yet we've wiped out that lore because they've discontinued Volos, right? They gave us I don't think there's a Caucasian person in all of Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, and yet Spelljammer gave us the Hadozi, which was so fucking problematic from just the concept from square one all the way through. So it's like they're trying, but they don't understand yet. We got Eberron, Keith Baker's phenomenal creator. We talk so highly of Eberron on the podcast. And they've got prosthetic limbs, and they also have magical prosthetic limbs. And I was kind of waiting to see that in other things. And we did get Alanic Ray, who is one of the famous NPCs in the Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, and he's wheelchair bound as well. But that's one. Like, we're not getting enough. We're still getting more goblins and kobolds than we are getting, non-cisgendered, non-straight, non-white people, right?
Right. And I think too, in some ways, WotC just overthinks things sometimes, and sometimes maybe underthinks things.
Yeah.
But we're really not trying to as you say, in Theros, there's representation throughout the art, but it's not really addressed.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder if that's a result of, not considering it, or if that's a result of overthinking what a community response to something might be. Really what we're trying to do with this project is just present a variety of people and options in a very, matter of fact way, which I think is the best way of just, conveying something like this. At the end of the day, no matter who you're playing with, as far as D&D is concerned, we're all here to enjoy the game. And so everything is simply presented from that standpoint.
Yeah. And I mean, we have seen clearly in the last couple of months here, the fact that the upper management and the actual content creators at Wizards of the Coast, they are not necessarily aligned, right?
No.
There are money decisions being made, which is why I think they've pulled back on the Drow and the Orcs. And I think the money decisions are what gave us Monsters of the Multiverse, so that they could be more quote unquote inclusive. But they did it by excluding lore instead of including new lore, right? And you can see the content creators trying to do stuff with the art, and we're going to bring Alanic Ray back, and we're going to focus, this publication is going to be about this. But Radiant Citadel didn't get half of the publication or the media that Dragonlance got, right?
Right. To be honest with you, I barely knew anything about it until I finally, just through happenstance, came across it through someone else,
Yeah, honestly, I think that it is refreshing to see a group that's producing content that is on the same page from the top to the bottom, because that is clearly not the case with WotC and Hasbro. And I don't want to say too much because they'll come at me with a lawsuit, but it does feel like every decision they make to be inclusive is made by straight white guys in a boardroom, right?
Yeah, I tend to agree.
So anyways, now I'm getting preachy, so I'm gonna move on.
No worries.
Back to the Ooze Rancher. The thing that I liked about this with the Ooze Companion is you also get a bunch of different besides the Ooze Companion, you get a bunch of these different class features at different levels, but much like in Ooze, you get to choose your consistency of rubbery, sticky, or stretchy, which I thought was really fun. That's really neat, and it's cool to see. And you clearly had this designed before we got the new Dragonlance book, and they happened to design a parallel thing. Their Lunar Sorcerer lets you choose which phase of the moon in their class features, so full moon, half moon, or new moon. And it's very reminiscent of what you guys are doing here, which is really cool to see that design parallel happening.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Ooze Rancher has been around now for I think about 6 months or so, and so it's interesting that that parallel existed. I think part of that is we pay attention a lot to what Wizards is doing, and we try to understand why. Because as much as we we might want to talk about what Wizards does wrong, they do a lot of things right.
Yes.
Especially in regards to game design, the mechanics themselves. And so we try to stay up to date with what it is they're doing, and we try to have discussions about it amongst ourselves, so that even if there's something they're doing that we don't quite agree with, we don't quite align with, we at the very least understand why and try to take a lesson from it.
Yes, I'm curious to see. We do that on It's Mimic all the time, and I think that the listeners know that I will go off on fucking tangents. It drives some of the other hosts nuts. Or I will go down a rabbit hole about design decisions, and lore decisions that they make. But
Sure.
I'm curious to see what their decisions are going to be for 1D&D. It seems to me like their decisions are just wildly misplaced at this point, but we are just operating off playtest material. I'll tell you this, I like this preview feels better than all of the playtest material they've given us for 1D&D, which
Wow,
drives me up the wall.
that's high praise. For me, 1D&D has been very scattershot, which to some degree I think is the point at this stage.
Well,
as
they're
far as
throwing
that,
shit at
I'm
the
not
wall
sure.
to see what
Yeah,
sticks, right?
exactly. I'm not sure what else I can say about it beyond specifics.
The next one was the subclass for the sorcerer, which might be the most flavorful, and this was the Iron Blood. And I gotta say, so I'm gonna read the quote. I'm told the best way to defeat a mage is to disarm them. Those witch hunters will have a conniption if they ever meet a mage who simply bleeds weapons. And the idea here is that you are pulling weapons from your own body, from your own blood and flesh, right? And
Yes.
That's such a cool image that I haven't seen before in D&D.
Yeah, and so this is sort of a concept. Man, I used to follow comic books so much more heavily. I don't anymore, but I know there's an X-Men character who can create blades out of his bones.
Yeah, that's it's Marrow, one of the Morlocks. I worked in a comic book store for a number of years, so.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, so
Gotcha.
I was about to say this feels very much like that, but with like blood magic on top of it, which is really cool.
Yes, and it is, we do, that is one of the directions you can take the subclass. Another point of inspiration, I don't know if you've ever seen the Fate Zero anime, but there's a character who can conjure weapons, and sort of his whole power is he just conjures weapons from, an otherworldly armor, right? So the idea here is sorcerers are obviously very connected to their blood. It's what gives them their powers. Yeah. So one of the directions you can take this class, or the subclass rather, is to pull those weapons from your body, whether it be your bones or your blood. But another direction you can take is, your family has some sort of special connection. Your blood has some sort of special connection to weapons that allows you to conjure them out of the earth or out of thin air, or perhaps some extra dimensional pocket.
It does feel a little bit like the sorcerer's answer to the Pact of the Blade Warlock, right?
Yes, very much so. That was sorcerer didn't have its equivalent of blade singing or Pact of the Blade, and so we felt it was time to give it something like that.
And tying it right to their blood is so. I mean, that's just the sorcerer to the nth degree. So, like, I enjoyed this one. Of all of them, this will be the one that I would play.
Me too, given my proclivity for sorcerers.
Especially with the wakeful. I think being able to I'd flavor it with, it's your bone marrow and not your blood. But the idea of breaking a rib and drawing a sword out of the marrow is just ridiculously flavorful. And then the last one we have here is a wizard subclass called the Hierophant. And yes. So I was looking through this one, and I was having a little bit of difficulty grabbing the idea of the divine magic wizard, right? Sure. It's I get to the arcane magic cleric because you can worship a god of Arcana, right?
Yes.
But having a wizard that is tapped into the concept of the divine magic and whatnot made me pause for a moment and go, well, wait a minute, that's not what the class is about. And then I'm sitting here thinking, like, I had Dan, who the people on the listeners will know Dan, obviously. He went off to like Bible school. People go off to just learn religion, right? And don't necessarily end up, worshiping in a church or a temple.
Would you
right?
be surprised to know that one of our team members is a religion major, a theology major, who is an atheist?
Well, there you go, right? I mean, look, I myself am not a churchgoer. My God, I've read the Bible front to back like 3 times, and I did it once because I was in a lit course and I wanted to have a better idea of the metaphors that were being thrown around, pre-18th century. So, and that's what it was when in literature. So, everything was tied back to religion. So it's cool to see this side of a wizard, because it was really something that I not only had never thought of, but didn't even feel right until I stopped to think about it and went, oh shit, there's something that was completely outside my wheelhouse. Though it never would have occurred to me, but what would have occurred to on the podcast, Brad and Dan and Tyler absolutely would have been like, yeah, sure, that's a thing. No, totally bypassed me. So it was cool to see it here.
I'm glad we could sell you on it a little bit. Yeah, it's sort of the inverse of that knowledge cleric, right? Where it's the wizard that studies divine magic and thus uses that as sort of almost like any other spell school, right?
Yeah, it was. I looked at this page and the art is beautiful for it. I absolutely love the art, but the first thing that caught my eye was lesser restoration on a wizard spell list. What are you doing? What is this nonsense? And then I went digging and I'm like, okay, I'm in. So
for sure. Well, I'll say this too. With as many off-the-wall ideas we have going here, it's very possible that they won't all be hits for everyone, and at the end of the day, that's okay, because as long as as long as there's a few people who love the idea, that's what's important to us.
Yeah, and look, there's a consistency here that I harp on a lot. The idea of when you're DMing, you need to have a basic level of consistency. Otherwise, you start to lose the trust of your players. So there's a consistency behind all of these decisions and all of these design choices that I really appreciate. The idea of looking at something that we think we know from a different perspective and finding something new. You're going to get different kinds of characters, and there's something for different kinds of players, which is phenomenal. I'm assuming that the subclasses are going to be a decent chunk of the book. Are you planning on hitting all of the classes?
Yes. Well, for the most part, with an asterisk. So we are going to be doing at least 2 to 3 subclasses per class, with room to expand just where appropriate, where it feels appropriate. So it is going to be a sizable portion of the book for sure. The only class that we will not be including is the Artificer, and that is simply for copyright reasons. We are unable to do so. We have created Artificers, and we created them as fan content under the fan content policy. But we are just unable to do anything else. So unfortunately, Artificers will be excluded.
Yes, there's been quite a bit of outrage about that online recently, and I get that completely. The idea of pulling back on the Artificer. I know a lot of people have pulled back and actually pulled some of their Artificer published material, understanding now that it's not covered by the OGL.
Sure. Well, for what it's worth, you can still, pop by our website and see what we've made. I think we have like 4 or 5 Artificer subclasses, but they will not be making an appearance in this book.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing, is you can't charge money for them, right? Like that's right. That's the deal. The next portion of the PDF here digs into expanded weapons. And so there are a few things here that are really Okay, so there's some throwbacks to 3.5 that I really appreciate. Like the idea of there being keen weapons, which allows you to get a crit on a 19 or 20.
Yes.
You have it broken down so different classes can use different weapons as part of their, like, even everybody can use a dagger, but only some classes can use martial weapons, or druids get all sorts of special rules and shit like that. So you guys have added to those lists based on your pretty extensive expanded weapons list. I like the fact that you have included shields as weapons. And I wanted to just touch on this. I want to go through it really quickly because you've got so many of them here.
Sure. Yeah, we don't need to talk about all of them.
But I saw brass knuckles, boomerangs, katanas, and wakizashis, and a war scythe. That made me really happy. I also see the war fan there, with the inclusion of a lot of Eastern culture weaponry as well, which I am currently in the middle of a Legend of the Five Rings campaign.
Spectacular.
So seeing this pop up here made me grin quite a bit. I'm like, wakizashi, I can use that in my game. So but I also see a lot of throwbacks to previous editions, like the composite bow and the repeating crossbow, the buckler and the shuriken. The idea that we have these now in 5th edition, frankly, they were missing, and I've complained kind of in the past about some of these not being available as weapons in 5th edition. My favorite 2 additions, though, to this were the 10-foot pole as a weapon, because that's so fucking classic D&D. And then the lit torch as a weapon, which every table has been like, what happens if I hit him with the torch? Well, now there's like legit rules for it. And not only is it a light weapon, but it's also a light weapon. So
that's true. It's a lit light weapon.
Yeah. And a special shout out, of course, to the Molotov cocktail. I'm glad that made the list as well. So I had a good chuckle. Up next is a section on feats. I'm always glad when I see additional feats, because feats can get overlooked in homebrew content and in third-party creations. However, they're also really, really hard to keep balanced. And
even for wizards themselves.
Oh my God, yes. I've got to say, though, there were a couple here that I went, you know what? This had better be good, and it delivered. The Blowgun Master was fun. The Horde Skirmisher, the idea that you are just good at fighting in a mass combat, in a battle, is really flavorful, and I like the shit that they can do too. The Slippery Escapist is a lot of fun, and makes sense for mass combat. And that's the thing, is they are all about the next logical step in the thought process here. Which is really fun. I wanted to ask, though, you have listed here in the preview Conjuration Adept and Evocation Adept. Do you have adepts for each one of the schools?
Yes, we either have them developed or in development, and our plan is to have a feat for each of those schools present in the book. Something we wanted to do with the book, I mentioned how I always like to play casters. Part of that is because it feels like, martial characters are just at such a lack of options sometimes.
Yeah.
And so both through the expanded weapons and the feats, that was very much one of our primary goals, primary challenges to address, I suppose. And so despite that, we wanted to make sure that we weren't leaving spellcasters behind. We wanted to, serve that as well. And while we have a bunch of really great spellcasting feats, it's kind of crazy to me that we don't have anything that focuses on schools. And in a lot of ways, outside of like wizard subclasses, it feels to me that the schools are kind of an afterthought in 5th edition.
They're a holdover from previous editions, and it feels that way. You can tell that they were trying to lean into it early in the 5th edition lifespan, but they've since given up on that. And I mean, you kind of have to when you need to come up with more wizarding schools. Are you thinking at all about the other kinds of wizards or other spellcaster subclasses, like different feats for the different warlock patrons, for example?
Yes. So we don't have any warlock material in the preview. But I can say that one of my favorite things I've created for Warlock is called the Pact of the Marked, which is this idea of your body being marked in some way by your patron. And so that is something we are planning on including alongside a whole variety of subclasses and Eldritch invocations. So the Warlock will definitely be served by this book as well.
Cool. It's funny. Warlock is one of those things that I feel just never gets considered in the grand design scheme of things. So
it's
nice
hard to because there's so much of it and it's ever expanding.
Yeah. And a lot of it doesn't make sense. The fact that we have an undying and an undead Warlock patron, it feels very, very strange.
I think the reason that happened, if I'm not incorrect, which one came first? Was it
the Undying came first? The
Undying was the one that came first. I think, if I'm remembering correctly, the Undying was really, really underwhelming. Yeah. So I think the Undeath was kind of just a retry in some ways. As weird as that is.
The Undying was such a weird. I want to say it was Sword Coast Adventures Guide, which should tell you everything you need to know.
Sure. Yeah.
So, speaking of design missteps, that book, oh my God. The other cool thing here is the prosthetic prodigy. This is another feat here. Yes. And again, I like to see the inclusion factor here. The art is really cool. That is a badass prosthetic leg. My dad only had one leg when for the last number of years of his life. So it's cool for me to be able to see this stuff, and I've become more aware of like mobility issues and stuff like that. But it's cool to see this kind of representation out there for people.
And it's important to us too, with Dungeons and Dragons being, obviously a game for fantasy, a game for role playing. It's sort of a power fantasy. Oftentimes, we want to make sure that you can play these different kinds of characters with these different kinds of bodies. And we want to make sure that you can do that in a way that feels unique and in some ways empowering, because, no one in real life can cast magic, but 5th edition allows you to do so. And so, sure, maybe no one with a prosthetic leg can integrate, high-tech tools into their leg or, use it as a weapon or anything like that. But it's a fantasy game, and so we're trying to really develop these concepts into something that plays well with the rest of the spirit of 5th edition.
Which actually brings me to the next thing, and that is you guys have created these character tables, and I assume that there's going to be a whole lot more in the finished product.
Oh yes, so this is my team member Nona's baby, and this was these 2 pages were the result of me saying no, we gotta hold on, tone it back, it's just the preview. I would expect a sizable portion of the book to be things to be character tables as well. Now
we've got a couple of hosts on the podcast who absolutely love the character creation tables in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. And as a matter of fact, I've got a player who's also one of the hosts, Dave, who God, every time he makes a character and he sits at my table with a new character, he rolls it randomly. God knows what we're going to get. And it's wild. He was a Leonin wild magic barbarian, and now he is a fairy scout rogue. And he is not a good role player, but he's a great strategist. And that's what he leans into. So he's all about the tactics. So he rolls randomly, and it's absolutely fucking wild. I love to see random tables like these, because as random as they are, they're not just random. There's information behind it. And there's clearly a design here. We take the first one, and this is a section, randomly choosing your race. The commonality of how common our race is, and you're rolling D100, so it's your percentile dice. A 1 to 50 means it's common. 51 to 85 means uncommon, and 86 to 100 means rare. And these are the different playable races, of course, that you can play. And the rare are all the ones that are outside of, I guess, Xanathars, right? And outside of Volos. And Volos would be the one that had all of the like uncommon races, Orc and Hobgoblin and Goblin and shit. right? Whereas the player's handbook races are the common ones. Human, dwarf, elf, and halfling are the ones that you decided. Interesting that you decided not to go gnome or half elf for common, but I don't hate that. I like that. It makes halflings and gnomes different.
So we used the player's handbook actually to help inform this, and I want to clarify these are completely usable right out of the book, but they are also customizable, and these are example tables. Really, our goal with these is to allow you to create sort of a multi-tiered rolling system that is setting appropriate. So, you know, as far as the player's handbook is concerned, humans, dwarves, elves, halflings are the core 4 races, and then the others listed, so that would be, you know, your dragonborns, gnomes, half elves, etc. Those are also perfectly as valid, but maybe, at least as far as the Forgotten Realms is concerned, less common. And so we used that as a guideline for creating these examples to A, give you something usable out of the box, and B, show you ways that you can do this with your own setting. And it adds some nuance to that rolling, so that it's not just like a, you know, reincarnation table, right? Where there's an equal chance of being anything at all, which is its own thing, certainly. But there's some nuance and some appropriateness to how you roll here that can even be used as a DM in terms of deciding town populations or anything like that.
One of the things that I've got to say that I love about this is this informs me about when I am building a settlement. This informs me how many of each NPC races will be there. Right. So I know that I'm going to be majority human, but how many half orcs does that add to the mix? And as I consistently work my way through these tables, I will get population percentages out of this. So there's use as a DM for this beyond just a player rolling, right?
What's beautiful about that randomness too is you may say, okay, I'm going to have some amount of tiefling population in my world. And you might be rolling for a city or a town, and you will, for whatever reason, it's random, right? So you might roll an unusually high level of tieflings. And that right there is just a jumping off point for that provides you inspiration for something that you may not have thought of. So now the question is, well, why are there so many tieflings? What does that mean for the town? How does that impact the culture of the town?
Yeah, so I really appreciate this. And I love sections like tables like this. The other thing that I saw here, and this is going to be useful for people that are aware of but are not necessarily involved with the LGBT community, is you guys have a queerness table as well. With it looks like it's just broken down into sixths essentially on the percentile dice, just to give kind of a
basic overview,
really. Of the different options out there. If you wanted to embrace that, again, I've got a couple of queer players at my table as well. I've DM'd for people that identify in different ways and have different. I don't want to out anybody; it's not my place. But I've got some experience with this at my table, and so I have started myself, including NPCs that are non-binary, that go by them, they pronouns and shit like that, just as extra representation, and having something like this laid out to say, hey, you know what? These are the different kinds of characters, NPCs that I can add in there to just make it more real. People like this do exist. So even if you don't have anybody at your table who is bisexual, doesn't mean that you can't have a bisexual NPC.
Right. Or a bisexual character. Part of the fun of D&D is being able to, you know, role play as someone you're not and explore new perspectives. So the queerness table is sort of a microcosm of what we're planning to include as far as things like that are concerned. We're planning on including, you know, tables regarding anything from eye color to fears to anything along those levels. That just all of this is meant to be inspirational insofar as, what are aspects to a character that I may have otherwise not considered, right?
Yeah, because honestly, we do have our cookie cutter defaults. I know when I look at my own list and I say, hey, I rolled up a dwarf. I need a dwarf NPC. I know who that is already because I've had 1,000 dwarf NPCs. They all kind of fit the same thing. Now I'm sitting here looking at all these different tables and say, oh shit, this one has freaking gray hair. Oh, I'm going to make him older. This one is polyamorous. They have 3 partners, right? Like, and that never would have occurred to me because I have run dwarves for so many years, right?
Right.
So as a DM, I find this shit very helpful to go through tables like this.
Right. The foundation that can provide for storytelling that you just may not have considered that will probably, since it's not something that's necessarily within your normal wheelhouse, will be really refreshing for you and your players, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, I absolutely love this. This is one of the highlights of the whole thing. It's cool that it's going to get expanded so much as well.
Yes.
Next up, you guys got into spells, and again, we could go through them all, but we're running out of time here, so I'm gonna try to list off the highlights that stood out to me. First of all, thank you for including a 4th level acid spell and additional cold spells because, geez, we are just missing those. Also, the 1st level spell, Disarm, very much appreciated. That feels like a throwback from 3.5 as well. It's funny, we recorded an episode. I mean, here's a spoiler. We recorded an episode, me and Dave and Kyle, last night where we were talking about the disarm mechanics. And can you use a spell to disarm someone? It says you can use an attack to, but they've got to roll the attack. So yes, Eldritch Blast and Firebolt. No, technically you can't disarm with sleep, even though they fall asleep, right? And you can't disarm with a fireball, right? Or disintegrate because it has to be a specific roll. So like we were tossing that back and forth. And so I'm glad to see this spell pop up here as kind of the answer to that. Also, it's really helpful to have this table here list out. Is it concentration? Is it ritual? Is it a ritual? And what classes it can be applied to? Are you guys, when your final product, are you going to do that big page that Wizards always does where it lists out, here are the bard spells by level, here are the cleric by level, or are you going to keep it on charts like this?
It depends. So this works very well. This is a table actually modeled off of how Tasha's Cauldron of Everything handled things. And it's really helpful. One of my biggest pet peeves with the player's handbook and with a lot of sort of spell expansions is that they're actually kind of a pain to flip through. It's not easy to quick reference what is and is not concentration, what is and is not a ritual, and what school. It can really be a pain. So for a smaller document like this, this table works really well, I think. We are planning on having quite a few spells. This is just the preview, and I think there's about a dozen here or so. And so I am not sure how digestible that would be on a table like this.
It would be a lot. It would be information overload for a lot of people.
What I will say is that I'm going to do my best, given those issues I have with larger spell expansions, to expand the use case of the formatting of that section. And that may include just, telling you on a big class spell list, what is and is not a ritual, what is and is not concentration. I'll be experimenting with tags and things like that. It's not really settled at this moment, but it is something I'm thinking about.
Fair enough. I'm gonna just move through these. My favorite ones, right off the top though, were Consume Memories. That one is super flavorful, and as a DM, it's fucky. That's 6th level necromancy, and I love it. My favorite thing about it is that you can actually steal memories from the dead, and the only way that so if you were to speak with dead, they may not remember that information if you're trying to get past it. This is one of those things where it's like, why do you bother to make mysteries in Dungeons and Dragons when you can just have them speak with dead? And now suddenly we know who the murderer was. This gives me a way around that, and it answers a question that I've seen people ask. So I like that. I also like Prepare for Adventure, the first level spell. That one was a lot of fun, where you can essentially just as a first level spell, you conjure up just random adventuring material that you want, and it lasts for 8 hours, and then it goes back to whoever you stole it from, which is really
reach
fun.
You reach into the endless pocket dimensions created by bags of holding,
Yeah.
So I like to imagine, there's someone across the country whose campaign you've just ruined because their wizard staff just isn't quite there anymore.
I did want to ask, you've got a third level transmutation spell called Granny Greenwart's Hissing Boils. Do you guys, without going into the spell, do you guys know who Granny Greenwart is, or is this just a name? Is this an NPC from your own campaigns?
So it is analogous to an NPC from our campaigns. We're big fans of hags, and Granny Greenwart is most certainly a hag.
Oh yes. Yeah.
Yes. And the spell itself is just so nasty. For those curious, it allows you to essentially make these spontaneous bubbling boils appear on someone's skin and then explode with acid when you stop concentrating on the spell. And so that just seemed like such a gnarly, horrible concept that a hag just seemed entirely appropriate.
I love it. I also think that you guys have really done your due diligence on the material components as well. Without going into them, a lot of the times I don't think they necessarily make sense in other stuff that I've read. It's all thematic, it all makes sense, and it's all easy enough to come across. Right? Like, it makes sense that you would have these things instead of a 15,000 gold piece worth of diamond dust. Like, where the fuck did you get that from? Right? But a handful of poison berries, yeah, I can do that with a nature check. So
right, for sure.
I also liked Stone Mound had a skipping stone, specifically a skipping stone, and that just conjured up in my head the idea of a wizard and a barbarian arguing about what constitutes a skipping stone as they're standing at the edge of the lake, right?
I think, material components, they don't often come up because, obviously your arcane focus can substitute for them. But even Wizards of the Coast, I think, does a great job of providing these fun little nods and ideas that often go ignored. I don't know if you're aware, but Detect Thoughts, its material components is, I believe, a copper piece because, you're giving a penny for your thoughts.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. I'm trying to remember. I think it's Darkness, who uses bat guano, because where would you get bat guano? In the dark.
Oh, it's Fireball, actually.
Is it Fireball?
Yes.
That's bat guano?
Yes.
Because I assume it burns.
I suppose so. I'll be honest, I'm not sure quite what the impetus there was. That might be a holdover from previous editions, actually.
One of our hosts, Terry, played a disgusting Dragonborn druid a couple of years ago, who absolutely loved to cast Fireball. And he did it by eating everything he cast, he ate the spell components. So when it came to bat guano, it was always a delicacy for him. So
that's one of my favorite ways to play a druid. I feel like too many druids, they're wild men. They're too sort of like primped and pampered.
Yeah.
Make druids nasty again.
Yes, I've gone off on rants about that. If you don't have boils and fungus between your toes, you're not doing it right. So the next section is magic items. Again, we've got a list here: uncommon, rare, and very rare. Will you guys be including common magic items, like magical trinkets, or are we focused on like the legendary items?
We certainly plan to. It's right now we wanted to focus on things that felt a little more impactful. And if we are including common magic items are difficult, honestly, because it's hard to really strike that balance between trinket and uncommon magic item where it should do something for you. But
I find also that if you don't know what your setting is, you don't know how common these, like, is a stone that just glows with bright light for an hour, is that game breaking for some settings? Because that would be incredibly powerful in Greyhawk, and completely ignored in Eberron.
Right. Well, and obviously it's all at the DM's discretion as to what
Yeah.
they do and don't want to include. So short answer, yes, we want to include common magic items, but it was not a focus at all for our preview here. And when we do include them, they will probably sort of be a minority of what's available.
That's fair enough. I love little magical trinkets and stuff, but honestly, it's usually an afterthought. And it's more for flavor than anything else. And if you are going to have a big 300-page book or 200-page book or whatever it is, and you've devoted 3 pages to common magic items, it almost feels like filler and fluff.
Yeah, that's 3 pages that has been devoted to something that will likely be more impactful as the campaign progresses. So.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. For the magic items that you do have listed, there are 10 items on the list, and each one does have a full breakdown, and it's very much in the same wording that you expect to see in a Wizards of the Coast product. There is a magical artifact called the Blackened Blade that I don't want to give too much away on, but it has a rich lore. It's got a curse. There's some spells stored inside it, and there are special rules for destroying the blade, which I really appreciate. That's very fun and very reminiscent of like legendary items. I got to say, the art for the coat of arms made me laugh because it is literally a coat with 6 arms.
Yes,
and
that was probably one of my favorite pieces. You know, sometimes you come up with these ideas, and it's especially an issue with magic items because they can be so strange. And so, you know, sometimes you pass on an idea to an artist and you just have no idea what you're gonna get back. But I've been floored every time we've gotten something with this book, and the coat of arms is among my favorite. We'll be getting to another one of my favorites soon enough.
I'm curious to know which one. I really like the Ring of Dying was particularly flavorful and neat. I liked that, but I wanted to focus on the last page before we get into before it's the OGL. So you gave us 2 items here. There's the Shield of Shouting, which, by the way, if I saw this in real life, just based on the art, it would scare the shit out of me. That is an uncomfortable piece of art.
So speaking of my favorite piece, Shield of Shouting would be it. And it's just, the Shield of Shouting is sort of this congruence of, it's a sentient magic item, right? So this thing will be talking to you.
No, it won't. It'll be bitching to you. And that's what I love about it. This thing feels like Marvin from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Right. So
we really, and speaking of the art, really what we wanted to, with the Shield of Shouting, we wanted only bad vibes. So the Shield of Shouting is a mix of, you know, horrific and annoying and pitiful and just sort of all of these terrible qualities that have been entrenched into this wretched little magic item that is nonetheless quite useful. So I like the idea of this, giving the dungeon master a chance to talk some shit amongst the party, but B, I like it. I like the idea that this will create a little bit of tension in terms of the item being useful in combat and in other scenarios, but also just being not necessarily mechanically a problem, but just through its sheer annoyance a problem.
I love that it considers itself to be a hostage, but it's still going to go along with whatever you do. Like, I love this. I have had NPCs that have fit this narrative role in the past, but to tie it to a piece of equipment that your characters want to keep for mechanical reasons is a stroke of genius. And I quite enjoyed that.
You have to wonder, what is this thing going to sound like every time you block an attack with it, right?
Here we go again, God damn it. I think it's really fun. The other one here that I really liked is right beside it, which is the Sturge Spike, which is the spear with the tip that breaks off and does necrotic damage at the beginning of the creature's turn.
Yes.
Very fun. We've got a love-hate relationship with Sturges on the podcast, so I will be stealing this for my campaign. I want you to know that's going to be fun.
I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, we've done a little play with it ourselves, and it really it provides some new dimensions to combat that we've been really happy with.
I have to ask. Okay, so we've gotten to the end, and I've done everything in my power to not weigh in on the OGL nonsense with wizards.
Sure.
And so I do appreciate that it's listed here at the end. I think legally you have to, but it's good to see that it's still in effect. But I've got to I want to ask, there are two things that I was looking for in this PDF, and I'm like, I wonder if they will include, and those are monster stat blocks and NPCs.
Sure. So NPCs, we don't plan on having any pre-built NPCs at this moment. Now, as far as the character creation tables, what we do plan to do is give DMs a lot of tools by which to create NPCs.
Sure.
And now some of the items as well, and some of the pieces throughout the book can provide some additional inspiration. So you mentioned the Blackened Blade has some lore that can be, that can be the foundation of an entire quest right there. And some of the central figures there are laid out for you should you want to use them. So we do plan on including flavor that's very useful, and some of that will be adjacent to NPCs, as well as the ability and the tools to create your own and to help you do that. But we don't plan on having any kind of section of NPCs. The same is true of monsters. Now, monsters are one of my favorite things to create, and so it took some self-restraint not to include them. But the issue with including monsters in this book is that monsters, I mean, there's a monster manual for a reason, and that is its own book. So including a section on monsters rather, would unfortunately just take away from our ability to include other pieces of content. So what I can say is that we have created a ton of monsters in the past, and we are looking forward, on future horizons. If we get the chance to create a monster compendium and really just devote an entire book to that concept rather than just a section at the end here, that is something we're very interested in doing. But it's just not quite within the scope of Tales from the Firelit Gathering.
And if I can be completely honest, I'm glad to hear that. I am a big fan. Every time that we do a Legend Lore episode, I'm eager to get to the bestiary at the back. That is my favorite part of every one of the books. But this is clearly a player companion, not a dungeon master tool. There's no overland travel rules or, random dungeon generator rules in this.
Right.
This is very much races, classes, and feats and spells, things that a DM can use for inspiration, and it's great for DMs to pick up. But this is for you to have as a player to hand out to the players at your table if you are a DM. There's a lot of flavor in here because, I mean, on average, 80% of the players at a table, 80% of the people are players, right?
At least.
Yeah. So
it's definitely not a Dungeons Master's Guide or anything like that. We do plan on including a few alternate rule sets, but anything we include will be, player side focused, or at the very least table focused. So we've been working with resting rules. Normal D&D resting rules have their own issues, and the offered alternative in gritty realism through the DMG is not much better in my mind. So there are, again, we are trying to plug some holes, and so we are planning on including some alternate rulescapes, but it's going to be play feel related. It's all going to be player side related. It's going to be related to their experience and what it is they're doing within the game. So definitely, as you say, this is a player focused supplement with some tools that DMs can use at their disposal.
Do you think you're going to add backgrounds or full classes beyond just the subclasses for the base 12?
As far as full classes are concerned, they are a beast among themselves.
Yes, they are.
We have made now 3 classes, I believe, 4 actually, 4 classes over sort of our course of homebrewing, and one of them, the Enjoiner, is a summoner character. It's an intelligence half-caster. And that is something that we are looking to include in the book, but that is going to be a stretch goal for the campaign because classes just, A, they take up a lot of real estate within the book, and B, they take up a lot of time and resources to develop. That is something that we can only include, responsibly if we reach a certain level of funding. So we do have stretch goals planned for things like classes, but that is going to be dependent on sort of how the project shapes up. And then you asked about not only classes, but what else?
But backgrounds as well.
Backgrounds. So backgrounds, we probably won't be including, if anything, just because backgrounds we found to be sort of what players get the least excited about. And not only that, but the amount of backgrounds that are available already are just
there's over
really
100
staggering.
Yeah, there's over 100.
So
it's nuts.
So we're not sure that we can add much more to that. We've experimented with creating backgrounds in the past. The people who like them really like them, but it is a small minority of people who really get excited about them. So I mean, I would say, if backgrounds are something you're interested in, it's something we've done in the past. You can check it out on our website. But for the purposes of this book, I think that real estate can just be better served for, additional subclasses, additional player options, things like that. Things that have a real mechanical benefit. And I'll say this too, the character creation tables will in many ways help inspire your characters in the same ways that a traditional background would.
Yeah, it'll flesh out a backstory, if not necessarily the mechanical background as we're used to seeing in 5th edition.
Right. It'll be a really good companion piece to the pre-existing backgrounds.
Yeah, and like to your point, to both your points about classes and backgrounds, for classes, it's not just building a class. You then have to build multiple subclasses for it, which is just an insane amount of effort, right?
Yes.
And then balance them all against each other, and then balance them all against the other classes. When people complain there are not enough classes in 5th edition, I look around and I go, aren't there? We seem to have most of what we need, and we can fit a subclass onto one to fill a niche.
It's something we experimented with, and after our first class, it's something we've been really progressively more and more strict about what we allow to be a class and not. Because I'll say this much, the homebrew space is chock full of classes, and a lot of times it seems like these things would be better served as a different kind of player option. If we're going to include a class, it's going to be because it truly feels unique. Speak to your point on subclasses. Yeah, that's definitely an additional challenge, because it would be really awkward to include a class and only have, 3-4 subclasses available for it alongside all of our other support to these legacy classes that now have, 20 plus subclasses.
Yeah.
If we're going to include a class, we're going to really flesh it out. And so I would expect, within the double digits range of subclasses, if we do include a class.
Yeah. And honestly, there's that is such a massive undertaking. As far as backgrounds go, I don't particularly see the purpose in it. And even Wizards of the Coast now, the last couple publications, the only backgrounds they're adding are setting specific backgrounds. There's nothing there that's just like random bartender. Like, we don't get that anymore. It is specifically the knight of this order, or this kind of spelljamming pirate, or whatever it is, right? Like, it has to be so specific, because I mean, the base rule of it's not even a variant rule. As rules is written, make it up, do what you want. Right. So, I mean, we can publish them all day, every day, but why? People can do what they want anyway from the very beginning, right? So.
For sure. And they're not very mechanically intensive. So as far as, part of what we do is a service where we are creating things that you can have confidence will be balanced and will function well. And so backgrounds are a much easier undertaking. And I'd encourage listeners, if they haven't really delved into home brewing, backgrounds are a great place to start. Now, all that's to say, this is just plans right now. You know, we're going to have to see how things shake out. It's very possible that plans change, but right now, with we've got a lot of years in the space creating, and with what we've seen from the community, we don't expect to include backgrounds, and classes will very much be dependent on what our funding allows us to do.
That's fair. So we've covered a lot in this episode already, but have we missed anything in the publication? Is there anything that's sneaky that you guys have been that wasn't a part of the preview that you guys are looking at adding outside of kind of what we've talked about already?
Nothing that I can reveal now. I've already been a little cheeky in terms of talking about the Pact of the Marked Warlock and things like that. So we've got a lot of plans, and a lot of it is under wraps, either because we're just waiting to release it, or it's still in development, and we're not gonna release something until we're confident that it's at least presentable, right?
That's fair enough. And everything in this seems to not just be presentable, but of the highest caliber as well. So I'm absolutely in love with this. Is there anything that you are excited about that you can tell us about that we didn't cover in the preview?
So we were talking in expanded weapons about the 10-foot pole as a weapon, right? And that's a little silly, obviously, but it's a lot of fun. So we have created many rogue subclasses, and this is still in development, so I can't talk too specific on it. But we've made rogue subclasses that play with the ways that you can use sneak attack, the weapons you can use to do so, and how that kind of changes the feeling of the rogue. So I would expect the weapons on the weapons tables do not exist in a vacuum within this book. I would expect subclasses that are going to interact with those weapons. And one of our classic creations is a rogue subclass called the Volter, which is sort of this, Robin-esque pole vaulting hero, right?
I like it.
Or
I like
I suppose villain if you're a rogue.
I like it because it's a pun too on the bank vaults.
Yeah, that's true. And so I don't know exactly how we're going to adapt that to this book, but I can tell you that it is almost certainly going to interact with the 10-foot pole as a weapon. And we're really going to be playing with the mechanics there. So look forward to subclasses that really put those new weapons to use.
That's fun. I'm excited about that. Like I say, playing in L5R right now with seeing the Wakizashi, but also the War Fan there, loads of fun. I'm excited for that. And I don't think that every player is going to pick up this book and be like, hey, this is this War Fan, what the hell is that about, right? Like, they're not going to necessarily get it, but those that do will fucking love it. And so if you've got a subclass that leans into that explains it a bit, that's going to help everybody across the board.
For sure.
And you're looking at actually printing, right? Like, this isn't just a PDF, ideally, with stretch goals and whatnot.
Well, even if we fund it all, this is a hardcover book. You can back at a tier that will secure you a hardcover copy. And we are, we've got several different printers we're talking to. We're going to be working out, what works best for us and our needs. We're going to be working out who can give us, the best quality print. And so that's all stuff that we'll obviously be handling behind the scenes once we fund. But yeah, it is a first and foremost, it is a printed expansion that can sit on your shelf right next to your other 5th edition materials. And so that is the plan. Right on.
Well, Tales of the Firelit Gathering is available on Kickstarter as of today. So you can check the show notes below for the links to both the Gelatinous Cubicle website as well as the Kickstarter page. Go show them love and support and back them if you have the spare coinage. For those of you in the know, the D&D community has been in a hell of a struggle with Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro over the last few weeks, and hundreds, if not thousands of people fought hard for the public to retain the ability to create and publish material for D&D 5th edition. material like this. And this is some of the highest quality that I've seen developed by a third party. I'm so stoked about a project like this, and the fact that it's able to move forward under the old OGL, because the quality and passion on display here is really second to none. So thanks for joining me on this episode, Trent, and thank you for sharing your passion project with me and with the community and our listeners. And for the listeners, thanks for listening to this special episode of Legend Lore from the It's a Mimic podcast. If you or someone you know is working on a project they'd like to showcase on It's a Mimic, please reach out to us at our email, info@itsamimic.com. For other D&D conversations, check out the playlists we've built on YouTube or browse the episode guide on our website. And thank you again for listening in to It's a Mimic, where you never know what you're gonna get.
I will say, as far as, and this is, feel free to edit this out if this is too much of a tangent, but when we talk about who's making the decisions about what appears in the book, what was really an eye-opening thing for me was the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, which I like quite a bit, actually. But the magical tattoos section. I am personally very invested in sort of the body modification community. I have a lot of tattoos. It's something that's very important to me personally. And the implementation of that mechanic throughout Tasha's Cauldron of Everything was very unsatisfactory, I find. Where, I mean, it's essentially, magical temporary tattoos that require it. I understand there's certainly balance concerns, but as someone who's deeply invested in the culture of tattoos and what they mean, again, it didn't deliver on that fantasy for me. Using that mechanic in a game is not going to help me feel like I am that kind of person. It's not going to make me feel like I have magical tattoos. It's going to make me feel like I, painted some magical marker on my skin.
It didn't feel like a character choice. It felt like a thing you're doing now with this item, and then you move on.
Exactly. And the wakeful was actually something we looked to address through that. The idea of a skeleton and being a skeleton who sort of is always regenerating, his body is always healing itself, really presented the opportunity for, imagine the kind of crazy body modifications you could do if that's the kind of body you had. And so Wakeful, one of my favorite things about them personally is that they carve things into themselves to help distinguish themselves from each other. And they will, create sheaths for their daggers out of their ribs and put spell components within their skulls. So
I love the flavor of the Wakeful, but we could make this episode just about the Wakeful. So I gotta move forward. And of course, I mean, for anybody listening who wants to fix this problem, Wizards of the Coast does not own the word artificer, and you can always make your own class with different rules called an artificer.
Just maybe seek a little legal counsel if that's something you're going to be selling. That would be my only advice.
I'm trying to sow chaos. Stop stomping on my dreams.